Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Welcome to Story by Story. I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And we're here to share an hour of stories, conversations about storytelling, some hints about storytelling, and it's just going to be a great hour.
And did you say the upcoming events?
Upcoming events. And actually, the one thing about upcoming events is there are once were past events that are now past, or events that were now past.
Yes, tomorrow is today's yesterday. No, that's not it.
What I'm trying to say, Kate, is that we've had some really good things happen in storytelling. Mm-hmm. We've had some Christmas storytelling. Mm-hmm. We've had some children at the well types of things.
Right.
I've just come off a really wonderful Story Sunday that raised some money for Schoharie recovery.
Joe is being modest. Joe put on two storytelling programs for Schoharie recovery and raised $3,000. That's a lot of sheetrock.
It's a lot of sheetrock, and you know there's still a need out there. So let me be the first to just make one other pitch. SchoharieRecovery.org. It is a great story. It is the story of the community of Schoharie coming together to take care of itself with a little bit of your help. So please check that website out if you haven't. Mm-hmm. Never miss an opportunity to raise money for somebody that needs it. And well, actually, you know, I was down at Proctor's the other night. I was there in the Robb Alley, mm-hmm. and it was just before one of those big Broadway type shows. Mm-hmm. And you know, I saw the best storyteller. I saw it was like she had she didn't have an angel for a voice, but she was just a classy storyteller. She told stories about Broadway persona, and it was just wonderful. And we didn't have enough seats for the people to sit in.
It was standing room only.
It was standing room only, and some of those people standing were walking to the theater, but that's okay.
Some of them were stationary. No, there were about 50 people who stopped and were kind enough to listen to my stories about the Gershwin brothers and the creation of South Pacific.
Oh, it's a great story.
Yes, and how Jim Michener, who was a social studies textbook editor.
Right.
That's what he was. And due to essentially the generosity and the being fellows who wanted to do what was right, he got a larger cut of the profits of South Pacific than were originally negotiated. And he wrote in his autobiography, while it was never a lot of money, it did allow me to quit my day job, social studies textbook editor, and write full time. Now to me, anything that lets me quit my day job is a lot of money. But I guess in comparison to what he subsequently made, it wasn't.
Well, just so one of the organizations that we represent as the Story Circle of the Capital District is a resident company of storytellers at Proctor's Theater, and that's our main production arm. So we were there actually as a little bit of community outreach, and Kate held people entranced, particularly about the Bali High part of that. Mm-hmm. Just do a little snippet about Bali High.
Jim Michener was at a creative meeting once they had written almost all of those wonderful songs. And rehearsals were in the near future, just a few weeks away, when Oscar Hammerstein said, I think we need another song. They had meticulously planned out ahead of time where the songs were going to be, what they were going to accomplish, but all of a sudden he said, I think we need another song. A song that expresses the mood of the area and the feeling, and maybe we should use that wonderful place name that Jim used in one of his stories, Bali High. Richard Rodgers went over to the piano and started picking out a melody. And in 20 minutes, he had da 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 da. Now, afterwards, Jim said to Oscar, did I just see that, or did you two plan that? Had Richard already done that?
Had you rehearsed that?
Yes. And Oscar said, no. I've seen Richard do that a number of times. He seems to pull his melodies out of the air. I sweat for weeks over each word I write. But Richard Rodgers wrote in his autobiography, I had been living nothing but South Pacific for months. So once I had the place name and the purpose of it, there was the melody.
Now, my friends out in the viewing audience, we've had a good example of what story does to your mind and heart, because we've never met Jim Michener,
Nor will we ever.
Richard Rodgers, Oscar Hammerstein, or if you do meet him, another whole problem. So, but just think through how the combination in the images that Kate did in telling the story brought those people back to be with us with some of their essence, the things that made them who they were, and who their music, or what their music is to us this day. That's the power of story, and it's kind of magical at times, and that was one of those nights in Raw Valley when it was magical.
Well, thank you, Joe.
Yeah, it was fun. You know, our format is that we have a little bit of talk about what's been happening in the life of storytelling in the Capital District, and then we have a guest storyteller that we've invited to tell some stories and to talk about how they have become a storyteller or are still becoming a storyteller. And we've got really somebody very special today.
Somebody will knock your socks off.
You know, she tells stories about socks, doesn't she?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
that'll come. But Lorraine Hartin-Gelardi is from down in Poughkeepsie area, in Dutchess County. I met her several years ago at a Riverway Storytelling Festival program and at other places. I was really enthralled by the expressive use of her voice, her face, and she held my attention while she told stories. And I think you'll find the same thing will happen to you when you're watching her today, won't they, Kate?
I think so. Lorraine is really one of my favorite storytellers. And she's a wonderful story listener. Having Lorraine in your audience is really helpful. She has such an expressive listening face.
Oh, listening face. Welcome, expressive listening face.
Here I am.
You're welcome, all the way up from downstate. We call it downstate, right?
Right.
Downstate.
This is your third county today, at least.
This is my third county today. Yes, it is actually. It could even be four
Yes,
counties. Could
depending
even
on
be
how
four.
you-
Yes, yes.
Well, what we want to know is, you know, tell us a little bit about how you discovered that there was the voice of a storyteller in Lorraine.
It was serendipity. I had just moved to the downstate part where I live right now, and I had 3 young kids. And you know how it is when you move somewhere new and you're just trying to kind of fit in? I had a lot of things to do with the children, but I hadn't met any grown-ups yet. So the weekend was advertised, Storytelling Weekend, Hudson Valley Storytelling Festival. I thought, gee, that sounds nice. And I thought, I'd really like to go. But I was having company that weekend. And I was like, oh, darn, that sounds like so much fun. And at the last minute, they canceled.
Aww.
So I went to my husband. I said, you know, it's the whole weekend. Do you mind if I go? And this is when I knew things hadn't been going very well. And he said, oh, no, you should go. You should go for the whole weekend, Lorraine. And off I went. And I was entranced. I was absolutely entranced. I don't know, there was just something in me that was drawn to that. And at the end of the weekend, the director of the festival, a woman by the name of Tracy Levitt, who became a very good friend of mine, said, I'm starting a group, you know, for people who are storytellers and story listeners. You don't have to tell stories, just come. So they held workshops and meetings and told stories, and I sat and listened and learned for a whole year. And then they had a new teller's night. And I was like, oh, I'm going to try it, okay? But I had nowhere to practice. I mean, you know, it's no fun practicing in front of the toilet bowl as you clean it or washing the dishes. So I mentioned this, you know, thing to my daughter's 4th grade teacher, and she said, well, why don't you come in and practice on us? I said, all right. And after that, she started to hire me to come into the schools. And so that's really how it started. I just started telling stories in that school, and then it just truly word of mouth branched out. And that's how I got here today, really. I mean, it's a 20-year journey.
I know, but you had a lucky cloud over you.
That's why, I mean, I knew it was something I had to do. It was never a question in my mind.
Well,
it was
all these billboards were
do this now, Lorraine. Do this now, Lorraine.
We'll pay
Door
you.
is open. Yes.
The line I always like is that coincidence, your company not coming,
Yes.
is just God's way of remaining anonymous.
Exactly. That's one of my. There are
love
no
that.
coincidences. Yep.
or when opportunity knocks, you should answer.
You should. You should. That's one of the reasons I like the Jack tales so much, is because Jack, and I tell this whenever I tell stories to children, Jack always opens the door to opportunity.
We're talking about like Jack and the Beanstalk story.
That's
Right,
the Jack
yes.
I
tale.
just want to make
Yep.
sure that everybody was aware that
That's a good thing.
Not
because
Jack Kennedy.
Yeah,
or
not,
or-
yes.
yeah.
All the other Jacks
there
that
are
could
a
possibly
lot
be.
more Jack stories than just the Beanstalk
Jack and the
story,
Beanstalk
right?
one, there's a whole bunch of them.
Yep.
A whole bunch of them.
Now, along the way, you've become quite a collector of stories,
Yeah.
and you've given workshops. Tell us a little bit about the motivation to write the book about myths that kind of weaves some of the stories into the methodology and as a reference for all of us who are interested in storytelling. When did that happen?
When did that happen?
Yeah,
How
I
did
know when
that
it was
happen?
published, but how did that happen?
Well, that was also, again, a little billboard. A friend of mine came to me. I was on the board of a library, and I happened to volunteer to do the programming. So a friend of mine had written a book called The Keeners. And I said, oh, Maura, you need to come to our library and do a reading. And she said, okay, we'll have a meeting. Go to lunch, have a meeting. She said, before we start, she happened to be an editor for Skylight Pass. And she said, I'd like you to write a book. And I said, Maura, I'm a storyteller. I don't write books. I don't even want to do that. She said, oh, yes, you do, and you will. She made me write a proposal, and that's how the book
Is that
started.
right?
Yeah. And then, of course, then you had to really rethink. I had been telling and telling at that point for about, I would say, almost 14 years.
Wow.
And so I had a repertoire, which is why, but to write it, that was a whole different ball game. And the great thing about that is that I got to reimagine and reinvent these stories and retell them in a much different way. It was a real gift. It was a real gift. I still believe that book was a gift to me. Whatever else happened to it, and it broadened my horizons.
It is
more than anybody
a
else.
wonderful book. I do have a copy of it.
Yes, you do.
Yes, hand signed.
Of course.
Yes, and the name of it is.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So it's called Wisdom in the Telling, Finding Inspiration and Grace in Myth and Folktale Retold. Now, I want you to know there's a little story that goes behind that, because I said to my editor, well, that's a long one. She said, yes, it is, Lorraine, and I just looked at your website. How about you put the correct title in, because you of all people should not have it wrong.
Oops.
I had juxtaposed a few words.
And then you sent it to your webmaster, who just followed right along.
Who followed your strike, did what I told you. So, yeah.
Can you just take a minute and maybe share a point of reference in a story that was different when you wrote it than when you told it? I mean, what are some of those translations?
Oh my gosh, there are tons of them. But I would say there was my favorite story in the book, and I don't necessarily have favorites, but this has sort of become emblematic, is something called Stones and Treasures, that had started out as, I told it for years as a Jewish folk tale, and then I found a version called The Ragged Peddler in those books put out in the 50s, My Book House. And when I started with that, I started actually by drawing the story. All of a sudden it blossomed into something else. And all of the stories have these little kernels of truth in them. I mean, that's what stories are about. And I tell you, that was the most amazing one for me, because I tell it over and over in lots of different ways.
Oh, you see, now, I thought you were referring to, you had to translate from the oral and visual to the page. And so, and it was this big. you had to translate.
right into the 87 different words to describe
Right.
exactly how big it
Right.
was. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Now that's. It used to be bigger than a bread box, but I say now bigger than a microwave.
Microwave, right,
But
yes.
that necessarily doesn't, probably not great for a folktale. Or that I took a workshop with Donald Davis,
Yes,
one of
yes.
the foremost storytellers of personal tales in the country. And he said that around half of what is perceived is nonverbal. It is through your facial
Absolutely.
expression, your gestures, your body, tone of voice. So I mean, she was that kind of mother-in-law.
And try and put that on the
Right.
page. That was an awful lot of what I had to do. Was writing was very different than telling, but there was also this permission to reimagine, because you can do things in writing that you're not accustomed to doing in storytelling, and I reinvented them, and that was to me like, whoa, this is great fun. It was playing.
It was.
Hard work, but
Yeah.
playing. Yes, very hard work.
Speaking of great fun, wouldn't it be great fun if Lorraine told us a story?
Oh, would you please?
I will. I will.
I think
Because you
it'd be
all
great.
know that that's my favorite thing to do in the whole world. Well, I recently went to a wedding in Clearwater, Florida. And as happens to me over and over, when you go somewhere, eventually the conversation meanders around to, so, what do you do? I'm a storyteller. What do you do? I tell stories. Really? And that conversation goes on and on for a while. And on occasion, you get someone who'll lean over and say, yeah? Why do you do that? And this is what I tell them. There was once a professor who was much loved by all of his students, except for one young man who sat in the back of the room and shook his head every time the professor opened his mouth. One day, that young man cornered the professor as he was coming out of the classroom and said, look, professor, I gotta ask you one question. Every time I raise my hand in class and ask you a question, you never give me an answer. You just tell me a story. Why do you do that? And the professor looked at the young man and he said, well, if I'm going to answer that question, I'm going to have to tell you a story. And this is the story he told. Truth and story lived right next door to each other in the same village, and they were the best of friends. Now, Story, she went through the streets of that village, and everybody loved her. They loved to see her coming. They loved to stop and listen to whatever she had to say. Story had lots of friends. Truth, on the other hand, well, Truth went around stark naked. People didn't know what to do. They'd see Truth and they didn't know where to look. Finally, it got to the point when people saw Truth coming, well, they crossed the street, turned their backs, and walked in the other direction. Nobody wanted to be friends with Truth. And Truth, he grew sadder and sadder, until finally one day he went to his best friend Story and said, oh, what am I going to do? Nobody wants to talk to me. Well, Story, she looked Truth up and down, and she said, you know what? You need some clothes. Come with me. And Story took Truth upstairs. She opened her closet door and she said, I've got plenty of clothes. I'm sure you'll find something that you can wear. And Truth looked at all the things that were there. He set aside the elegant brocades and the fine velvets. He shook his head at the whimsical and the fripperies. And finally, Truth decided, on a pair of black pants and a black shirt. And just before he left, he reached out and he grabbed himself a bright red feather boa. And Truth went down the stairs and out into the streets. And Truth found that people wanted to talk to him. They would come up. They would say, "How do you do?" They would listen to what he had to say. And after a while, Truth had almost as many friends as Story. Now, when the professor had finished telling that story to the young man, he said, "I'm the same way. I give you the answer. I just dress it up a little. Because after all, no one wants the naked truth." And that is the story.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
That's one of my favorite stories.
I have to, you know, it is such a wonderful story about that question.
It is.
And I had never thought about quite how to answer it, because I usually, when somebody asks me what I do, I usually say I'm a consultant, because if I told them I was a storyteller, they just go, "Oh."
Oh, one of those, are you?
Or, oh, you read books to children in
Right.
libraries,
Oh,
which is a
yes.
very fine thing to do, but it's not exactly what storytellers do.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And now,
Yep.
can I just ask you, did you actually do that at a wedding once, or is that?
I've actually told that story to people at cocktails parties.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell it on stage, and I tell it when people aren't sure what stories are. I mean, I have a whole collection of stories that I use to explain what storytelling is. But I really believe that at the heart of all story is truth, and that all stories are true. I often say, my husband goes, "What is it you tell everybody, Lorraine?" I said, "Every story is true. It's just sometimes doesn't have any facts in it."
Or it may not
Or-
have happened yet.
Yeah, the story, and it's pretty. You know, every time you go into a classroom, and kids raise their hand, "Is that story true?" And you go, "Well, yes, but let me explain to you what I mean by true." And so, you know, if I'm telling Jack and the Beanstalk, I'll look at the child and say, "So, when you were climbing that beanstalk in the story, because they are with you every step of the way in the story, what were you thinking? Did you want to get to the top? Were you a little afraid to leave your house on the bottom?" And they answer a variety of things. I said, "Well, that's the truth of the story. It tells you something about who you are." I said, "But do you think there was a giant?" No.
I sometimes say the heart of the story is
Yes,
true.
the heart
but
of the story is true.
They used it, they told it this way
Yeah.
so people would understand it more easily.
Well, the facts are the facts, you know, but they don't make any sense unless they're placed in context. And the story is the context. Without the context, you don't understand facts.
Oh.
You know, you really don't.
No.
Yeah, facts need context, story is the context.
Exactly.
Okay.
If I say something to you, you know, like it costs 40 cents. You don't understand what that 40 cents means unless, like the story in the New Testament about the widow's mite, where she puts everything she has into the coffers.
Yeah.
That tells you what cost is about. Yeah. So you need context.
And I have to say that I listened really attentively.
Did you?
When Truth is the guy went up into the closet of the girl, I said, "Oh my God!" And then he takes the feather boa out, and I go, "Wow, boy, they're talking about
Whoa,
something."
what is she
now,
talking
now,
about?
if you weren't paying attention before he got in that closet, man, you were after that.
More and more people have said to me, "Truth is a he," and she takes him up to her closet. I said, "Yes," and you really have to think about that. You have to think about that. That has a lot of bearing on the story. A lot of bearing.
Yeah, because I had really only heard that told with two females.
Yes. Yes.
But that's
I like
a
this
nice
version,
wrinkle.
though. I
Oh,
like this
yes.
version. I mean, it raised my level of attention. I said, "What is she going to do next?"
What's he gonna wear?
Yeah, and of course, and taking him upstairs too.
Yeah, yes, I know.
I have to be. I'm a little bit of a dirty old man here, you know.
That did not go through my mind so much.
I didn't think it would, but at any rate,
Everybody approaches story in a unique way.
Yes.
I did remain in character. I'm afraid.
Yes, you are a character.
So.
Tis true, tis true.
Oh well, Lorraine, if you'll stand by for a minute, we're going to run some things that are coming up on the storytelling calendar in the month of February here in our own fine town, Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. And we've got some really wonderfully interesting things coming up.
Now, at the very beginning of the month, February 3rd, Friday night, we'll have our final pre-show spoken word program at Proctor's. These are free, and they're themed to what's going on in the main stage at Proctor's. So at the main stage at 8 o'clock is going to be Branford Marsalis and other musicians. At 7 o'clock on the stage in Robb Alley, which is across from the Apostrophe Cafe and kitty corner from the box office, sort of the indoor piazza of Proctor's. Claire Beetlestone will be sharing new stories from Black history. And she has lived in Africa, she has lived in Scotland, she's a radiologist in Cooperstown. Heaven knows what stories she's going to share with us.
And she's a wonderful teller and a very engaging presence on the stage,
Yes.
so that'll be a good program. And
Yes.
even if you're not going to the Winston Marsalis program, you can stop and hear Claire and then go to dinner in downtown Schenectady.
Right. Or pub hopping is.
Or pub hopping, as some people are prone to do.
Yes. Oh, now, just before Valentine's Day, and so this would be a wonderful thing to celebrate Valentine's Day a few days early with, is you mentioned, I mentioned in our introduction of Lorraine that she will blow the socks off of you. Well, her program with Karen Pillsworth is going to be called Socks Without Partners. That's such a sad image, isn't it?
Oh, that's talk about truth. I don't know about your laundry, but
and other love stories. Part of our Story Sunday dinner series at the Glenn Sanders Mansion. We're in our 13th season there, and Lorraine and Karen have appeared there before. So I invite you to come out to that. It's not to be missed. And bring an extra pair of socks. No.
Please.
bring one brown and one blue and see what you can find. Right.
You know, I celebrate in a very small way every time I do a load of wash and all the socks match up. I'm a knitter, and most of my socks in the wintertime are hand knitted, so it's especially important that none of them have wherever they disappear into the drain or the dryer filter or however they escape. So anyways. Now, word plays. Now, this is in March, but, you know, this program, it gets broadcast different times. So we didn't want you to miss this. We're going to have 2 word plays in March, one at the beginning and one at the end. So we're telling you about the early March one. Feisty is the word of the day. On Sunday, March 4th at 2 p.m. at Proctor's in the gallery. The gallery is the room above the box office. It overlooks that atrium in front of the GE Theater. And telling feisty stories will be feisty Janet Carter and feisty Claire Nolan.
Feisty people.
Yes.
I have one program that I'm doing that I'd like to just talk about. On February 7th, I'm doing a program at the Schenectady Historical Society at the new Francher Center out in Rotterdam Junction. And it's a program, If the Portraits Could Talk, the Stories They'd Tell. And it's a reprise of a program I did during an exhibit there in 2010 about some of the portraits of early settlers of the city of Schenectady. And it's a benefit for the Historical Society. It's $15 or $30 a couple, and it's a CD release party because the Ed Munger and his daughter Nancy accompanied me for part of it, and we're going to be everybody who buys a ticket gets a CD, and it's going to be fun. And the CDs will also be available for sale at the Society and at the Open Door in Schenectady. Going to be a fun time. Part of the Colonial Festival in Schenectady that first week of February.
Wow.
The annual.
Annual Colonial.
Right. Now, if you can't make it out to any of these live storytelling performances, you can find us on the internet very easily by going to storycircle@proctors.org and clicking on YouTube. We now have over 6 hours of stories there. They're being watched at the rate of 600 per month. None of them have gone viral, but we're approaching 7,000 stories being watched total.
That's great.
Since we started at the end of just about a year ago.
That's wonderful.
Yes, and you know these are more substantial videos to watch than cats doing cute things, and a lot of things that go viral. They're not quite as wonderful as they're wonderful in a different way than flash mobs.
Yes.
But flash mobs have a more general appeal than stories so far. But we're all working to change that.
We certainly are, story by story.
Yes, person by person. If you'd like to help us, we are an arts organization. We don't have a shoestring budget. We have a dental floss budget.
A dental floss budget. That is a very good metaphor for how we get around, I'll tell you. I'll just,
No, too gross. Okay. And wonderful people have donated $1,700 to underwrite our expenses.
This year.
And that will cover 85% of our house costs at Proctor's, our room rental and our personnel costs there. So we're very grateful to them, and we would be very grateful to you if you would care to join them in that endeavor. Finally, we'd like to give you a preview of something that's happening in the middle of March, and who better to share that information with us than Lorraine Hartin-Gelardi, who was a member of the committee for this year's Sharing the Fire, which is the 31st Northeast Storytelling Conference, put on by, this is a long sentence, have you noticed?
Oh, merciful.
Put on by League for the Advancement of New England and Greater New England Storytelling.
Yes, indeed.
and Lorraine, you are the co-chair of this program, right?
The steering committee, yes, I am.
Right. That's quite an honor and quite a
It's
quite
an
a headache.
honor.
I mean,
It keeps me busy, let's put it that way.
it does. Now, what
It
are the
does.
dates of this conference?
It opens on Friday with a pre-conference. We have 4 absolutely marvelous pre-conference seminars.
And this is March 16th, Friday, March 16th.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry, no. So it opens on Friday, March 16th at 1 o'clock with the 4 seminars. On Friday night, there is an absolutely marvelous storytelling concert called Vagabond Shoes, Stories from New York. And you
Those vagabond shoes
Da, 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 da.
aren't letting me stray.
You know,
Who came up with that title? You and I came up with that title.
I don't know who did that. But it's wonderful because it's stories from tellers that have come from very different regions of New York State, and it's a wonderful lineup.
Buffalo and New York
Buffalo,
City.
New York City, upstate New York, right near the Canadian border where I grew up. I mean, we have them all over. It's just marvelous.
And some very good ones from the local area, too.
Yes, and we have some talented tellers. So it's going to be at Page Hall.
Page Hall on the SUNY at Albany downtown
Right.
campus.
Starts at 7 o'clock.
Starts at 7 o'clock. Tickets are available at the Lanes, LANES.org website.
Exactly.
They're modest. There are group tickets available if you wanted to bring a group. We think it's going to be one of the best storytelling concerts in the area since Telebration was in Schenectady in November.
No, it really is. I mean, the lineup is wonderful, and we have Jonathan Crook, we have Reggie Carpenter, we have Lorna McDonald-Zarnota, we have Ken Bushman from right here, we have Robin Beatty and Regina Rest, Regina Rest from New York City. And I'm going to MC, and I think it's just going to be more fun than a barrel of monkeys.
More fun. And the conference itself is open for registration for members of Lanes, but also for the general
non-members,
public.
absolutely.
And the conference are certainly open to folks from the community.
Yes, it's wonderful to have people from the community.
And this is just going to be a great show. And now, Sharing the Fire has never been in New York before, right?
No, this is its first time out of the New England region.
Ooh.
So this is an entrance into new territory. And of course, we want everybody to come.
by everybody, you mean not just people who define themselves right now as storytellers.
No, that's the
but-
beauty of this conference. I mean, we start off the morning on Saturday with a keynote by a storyteller educator, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Kevin Cordy, who's going to unlock the puzzle of education using story. But we have 38 workshops afterwards, and those workshops hit every single way you can use story. They are for people who are librarians, who might use story in preschool areas, who might use story to teach anything at any level. They're for clergymen. They're for people who work with the elderly and do reminiscence therapy. There are ways for storytellers to use their voice. There are ways for business people to learn how to tell a story, to pitch it to other people.
People in the healing arts.
Absolutely. People in the visual arts. So, I mean, you can use story as a broad base for a lot of things, and that's what this conference does. So
Many
I think,
truths need some clothing.
yes, and we've got clothes in our closet.
And all those workshops are described on the Lane's website. too.
Yes,
So
you
there
can go to
and you can get the background on-
lanes.org and you will find
Now, is there
the whole list.
Are there other kind of showcase types of performances?
Yes,
that
on
people-
Saturday night there is something called an olio, and this will be held at the Sovereign Hotel
Which is base camp for the conference.
base
Right.
camp for the conference, and that is on
Western
Avenue.
behind I think of it as behind the University of Albany campus.
Well, you-
Well,
however
it's right
you,
out, it's opposite the front gate is the way I
Oh,
look at
you
it.
think of it that
I
way.
meant to-
Wait.
and it has a sign that says a Sovereign
Sovereign Hotel.
Hotel, which makes it
Makes
so
it
much
easy to
easier to find.
And our address is listed on
Yes.
on the slide.
Yes.
So.
So on Saturday night, there's a performance in the hotel, and that is also another collection of really wonderful storytellers, including a fellow by the name of Bill Ratner, who has been the 7-time winner of the Moth Story Slam down in New York City.
No, Los Angeles.
Oh, Los Angeles. Thank
Right.
you. You know more than I do.
Well, I actually beat him at the National Storytelling Conference
right,
in 2010. But he
Bragging rights here. Well,
You gotta go with 'em.
And the other person that's on that olio, which is really a concert kind of judged by the membership of Lane's.
Right. It's a showcase of the
And
members.
It's Joe Peck from Saratoga.
Yeah,
Our
yeah.
friendly farmer Joe was telling it that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's always a pleasure
It's
to
always
listen
fun.
to. Yep.
And then that night, there's also something else going on after the
There's
olio.
story slams and story swaps.
Story
So
swap.
we have all sorts of things, every kind of story.
What's a story slam?
Well, Kate, I think you know more about what a story slam is than I do, since you're producing one. Why don't you tell us what a story slam is?
A story slam is a competition. There for many years there have been poetry slams. And in the storytelling world, the best known, I think, is the Moth, which is headquartered in New York, but has spread to the West Coast also, and has various other locations, where you have a topic, you have a limited amount of time, usually 4 or 5 minutes. It's a
Right.
personal story, and you are in competition. But don't think so much Olympic competition. The judges, we do not have a Russian judge. We do not have, it's sort of, any of you in the audience want to volunteer to be a judge kind of thing. And
It's a lot of fun.
it's a lot of
It's
fun.
really meant to be fun.
Right.
A lot of fun, and it just kind of gets everybody involved. The judging process, coming from the audience, kind of makes everybody part of the
Right.
process.
And the title is Eerie Stories. And the way I've seen it written is ERIE, but storytellers will, I think, also go in the EERIE direction also.
Oh, I think there are going to be many directions
Yes,
for that
yes,
particular.
yes.
There's going to be a variety of truths. Yes.
Yes.
And then on Sunday morning we have some
Have
local
Children at the Well, I hear.
Yep.
Yeah.
Children of the Well are going to come and do, and there are more presentations. And then
Well, Children at the Well.
we
must
shouldn't give them
say-
short shrift.
Right,
That's
well,
not
just,
fair.
we know what it is, but it's
Yeah, you should.
the 6th year that teenagers from this area have been brought together. Teenagers from many faith groups have been brought together to learn how to tell stories from their own faith traditions. And in doing so, they learn about they meet each other, they learn about each other, their families
Right.
learn about each other, and they now are billing themselves Youth Storytelling for Peace and Understanding.
And it really does seem to bring that about. It really does.
I am their volunteer webmaster, and I consider my work that I do for them is what I am doing towards world peace.
Yeah.
Solving, the problem of world peace is a really big one, but storytelling, I think, is a really important one. If you listen to somebody else's story, you can no longer hate them. Mm-hmm. You may not like them, but you can't hate them, especially you can't hate them as the unknown but hated enemy, that kind of people, they don't have any features on their face. They don't really have they're just the feared ones.
No, it does. It stops. I mean, it keeps people from being strangers. Storytelling really breaks down barriers, and so once you listen to someone else's story, they're not a stranger anymore.
Right.
And
so they're known.
So that's what Children at the Well are doing.
And in between the stories and the storytelling and the workshops, it's a lot of conversation with interesting people.
Oh, you can
very
meet
busy
so
and
many.
interactive corridors and things that go on. So if you're at all interested in applying storytelling to your vocation, this is a great opportunity to sample some of it for a day or the whole weekend. One of the concerts we mentioned, and the website's lanes.org.
Lanes.org, definitely.
Yes. Sharing the Fire, the 31st Northeast Storytelling Conference.
We'd love to have
Sovereign
you come
Hotel,
and see a part of it.
Albany, and Page Hall for one of the concerts.
Right on.
Yes, indeedy.
Well, that's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to that happening.
Me too.
And,
well, I think the three of us, as well as others from this area, have pretty religiously gone to Sharing the Fire for the last. And it's been the previous 3 years they've been in Rhode Island.
Before that,
New Hampshire, and then they were located in Boston. But now Lanes has decided to take Sharing the Fire on the road, so to speak, and hopefully it'll be 3 years in Albany, and then
who knows? Who knows? But we'd like to give New York a home for storytelling. We really would.
I mean, in an hour and 15 minutes, I can be in Vermont and Massachusetts from where I live. So,
I know.
And I grew up in Connecticut, so it's the greater New England area.
The greater New England.
Very great. Very great. We're a great part of New England.
You know what would make me kind of feel good and maybe be a little happy?
What, Joe?
You're not happy, Joe?
Well, I am very happy, but if Lorraine
Even
could
happier.
tell us one more story before we have to say farewell, that would make me feel pretty good.
We have plenty of time.
Okay.
Okay, well,
don't let that go to your head too
I know,
much.
because I have been known
Let me quantify. We have 16 minutes. Okay.
We have 16 minutes. Okay, we're good then. Yes, because I do have a tendency to go on and on with story, as we know. Well, this story, my brother-in-law and his wife lived in New York City until 9/11. And when 9/11 came, they decided it really was time for them to leave New York City. They wanted to raise a family, so they left their place on Grove Street down in the village and they moved out to Rockland County. Well, so did a lot of their friends. They were all about that time in their life when they wanted to start families, so they all moved out to Rockland County, including their friend Stevie Mallet. Now, Stevie wasn't really interested in starting a family. All he had was his dog Buster, but he didn't want to be left behind. So Stevie moved out to Rockland County too, and he bought himself a house. Stevie bought a house right next to a retired couple, Salvatore and Carmela, right from Italy. Now, you'd think that a party boy like Stevie Mallet and his little dog Buster wouldn't have a whole lot in common with Salvatore and Carmela. But that wasn't the case at all. Carmela, she worried about Stevie. I mean, there was Stevie. He had no wife. All he had was that dog Buster. You know how dogs are, chasing the mailman, digging holes in the backyard. So she would go over twice a week with a tray of lasagna and some eggplant parmesan. Now, Stevie, he worried about Salvatore. All the house chores, climbing up on the ladder, cleaning out the leaders and gutters. So Stevie would go over and help Salvatore whenever he could. And they had another thing in common. They both raised rabbits. And they had a lot to talk about. Well, it turned out that Salvatore and Carmela decided to go down to Pennsylvania for a few days to visit their daughter. They needed someone to look after the rabbits. So who were they going to ask? They go right over and ask Stevie. Stevie says, no problem, I'll take care of the rabbits as if they were my own. So off go Salvatore and Carmela. Stevie takes care of the rabbits. On Friday night, Stevie came home. And he did what he did every Friday night. First thing he did was open the refrigerator door, take out a beer, open it up, start to drink it. Usually on Friday, Stevie didn't feel much like walking Buster the dog, so he would just open the back door and let Buster run. And there was Stevie, drinking his beer. And there was Buster, out in the backyard. And then Buster came over to Stevie. And when Stevie looked down, he saw something in Buster's mouth. He looked a little closer. It was a rabbit. Stevie bent down and he said, Buster, what did you do when he took the rabbit out of Buster's mouth? And he knew it wasn't one of his. It was one of Carmela's. It was kind of dirty. It was really limp. He shook it. Nothing happened. So Stevie went over into the kitchen. He turned on the tap. He washed the rabbit. Nothing happened. Stevie could not bring himself to tell Carmela that Buster had killed one of her rabbits. So he took that rabbit that he had tried to fluff up, went into the garage, opened one of the rabbit cages, and stuck the dead rabbit in the back. Shut the cage. The next day, Salvatore and Carmela came home. Stevie was in the driveway when they arrived. Stevie waved when they got out of the car. They waved. Stevie said, how was it? Did you have a good time? Oh, we had a wonderful time. And Stevie went right into his house. A few minutes later, he heard a little knock on the door. He opened up the door. It was Salvatore. Salvatore came in. He and Stevie started to talk. After a while, Salvatore looked at Stevie. He said, you know, Stevie, Carmela really loves her rabbits. He said, I like rabbits. He said, I think they're cute. You know, they're little fluffy creatures with long ears and little round tails. But to be honest with you, Stevie, I can't tell one rabbit from the other. But not Carmela. Carmela, she knows every single rabbit in her hutch. She gives each one of them a name. She's got Peter Cottontail, Mr. McDonald. She's got Fluffy, Mopsy, Grumpy, Sneezy. She's got them all named. So, of course, you know, Stevie, the minute we get home, the first thing Carmela does is she goes out to talk to the rabbits. And I'm sitting in the kitchen, and in comes Carmela. She got a dead rabbit in her hand. She looks at me. She goes, Salvatore, how could such a thing happen? Well, I want to comfort the poor woman. I look at her. I say, oh, Carmela, I don't know. It's the will of God. She said, no, Salvatore. It is not the will of God. This is Sneezy. Sneezy died the day before we went to Pennsylvania. I took Sneezy into the backyard. I dug a hole for Sneezy. I said a prayer to St. Francis and I buried Sneezy. So you tell me, Salvatore, how did Sneezy get up out of the ground and into the back of one of our cages? And Salvatore looked at Stevie, and he asked him the very same question. So, Stevie, how did Sneezy get into the back of one of our cages? And as far as I know, Stevie never came up with a good answer to that question. And that's the story of Sneezy.
that a Shaggy Rabbit story?
I have to tell you about this story. So this story, my brother-in-law and his wife did move out of Grove Street shortly after 9/11. And when my husband and I went to the baby shower for their daughter, David goes off with the men, and I stay with the women, and we do all that stuff. And David comes back, and he goes, "You're not going to believe this story that Robert told me." And so it was a story like that about one of his friends. And I looked at David. I said, "David, you know that's an old joke, don't you?" He goes, "Really?" I said, "Well, yeah, I've heard it before." But I was driving to storytelling in Long Island, and it was for a group of senior citizens, and I was short one story. You know how you're going in your head,
Yeah.
you're like, I could tell this, and I could tell this, and I could tell this, but I need something to just sort of lighten the mood.
Yeah.
And as I'm going along, I'm thinking of this story. So David happened to be going with me because his parents live in Long Island, and I started telling him the story of Stevie. He goes, "That's perfect. That is perfect." So that's how we came up with Stevie Mallet, who was the kid I grew up next door to.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's interesting the things you put in the story. You know, Stevie was, Carmela and Salvatore happened to be our first landlords. So and they were very much like that. So, I mean, when you're crafting a story, you're just pulling bits and pieces out of everywhere, and you come up with the story of Sneezy.
Yes. I'm telling a story tomorrow. The story I made up about, it's a fictional story about true facts.
Of course, that's how they all are.
Right. The people are figments of my imagination, but everything that happens to them happened to some of the Irish who came over because of the potato famine. Mm-hmm. And there are two priests in the story, and I'm going, oh, how am I going to, Irish, and how am I going to keep their names straight? Well, how am I going to? Well, 2 doors down from us lived Mr. Connor Ryan. So one is Father O'Connor, the first one's Father O'Connor, and the second one is Father Ryan.
Yeah.
No, it was just a fun story. I'm
Well, you know,
still...
stories are meant to be fun. There's an old Jewish saying that burdens carried,
Shared. You say that,
are
Joe.
Well, I would say shared joy is twice the joy, and shared pain is half the pain.
That's it.
That's the
Yeah.
way I.
Yeah.
But that's the essence of it,
Yeah.
and you're right. A story like that lessens any kind of pain that's in the room.
And sometimes, you know, when you talk about what you do, by helping out children at the well, you're doing your part for world peace. Mm-hmm. People carry heavy burdens, and I can't solve any of those. I can't, but what I can do for people is just lift it for an hour. And that's why, I think humor is very necessary.
A respite.
A respite. Yeah. Also, you can't, if you're laughing, you can't think of anything else.
Yeah.
So it alleviates some of the
I knew a woman
difficulties.
whose son was in a very bad automobile accident, and one of the things she prayed for was that he survived with his sense of humor.
Yeah, it's
Which I
absolutely
thought was
essential.
really,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Wonderful.
lovely. That's really lovely. I'll take that with me. Good.
Yeah, we kind of go on a little bit off the point of the story, but the point of the story really is that often a good story can be a point of reconciliation, and in some of the things that I find myself in when I'm chaplaining and I'm on my way to Albany Med after the show, that in that situation where somebody's passing away or very serious, it's been very interesting to me if I kind of just say, well, could you tell me a story?
Yeah.
Let me know something about this person. Tell me a story about the time he made you laugh the most or whatever. And it's just like it's the time, and people will start to tell stories about this person who's there on a ventilator, and they'll relax a little bit. And when I first started doing chaplaining, it's very hard to pray for people you don't know.
Yes.
So I kind of harvest my introduction to them in the stories I ask them to tell.
Right.
And then we talk a little bit about the situation, and then when we finally pray together, I know enough to kind of weave them into the prayer in a way that makes the prayer, I think, more meaningful for all of us.
For everybody, sure.
And without the stories, you'd never get there.
No.
So.
Well, I come from a Scots-Irish family, you know, on both sides. Both my parents are of Scots-Irish descent. So, you know, when anybody passes away, it is afterwards that we sit and, you know, story after story after story. And I have to say, you know, I've recently, in the past 10 years, had most of my aunts and uncles pass away. Mm-hmm. And each and every one of those funerals was a celebration, a celebration of a life well lived, during the Mass, and afterwards, you know, as we just sit and tell story after story after story.
I remember at my mother's funeral, her minister saying, Lucille kept a very good house. For instance, all the books in her bookshelves were in alphabetical order. And there were all these heads nodding.
That's
going,
a lot of what Lucille was
yes,
like.
Yes,
Yes. Yeah, but a story really gives more of a sense of who a person is. Yeah.
And for the connection with the listeners, I think we're talking the truth about the value of stories.
Oh, I think we very are.
And often when someone would say to you, well, I'm a storyteller, or tell me a story, and you say, I can't do that, talking about the people that you love and miss is a lot easier to tell than perhaps a fairy tale or something else. And so be mindful of just the method of telling a story about your own loves. I mean, I think that's a takeaway for me again today, because very, very real, very real.
Well, you talk about, Kate opened up by saying I was a good story listener, but if there's, in addition to learning, I mean, story as a storyteller, stories are really the way I see the world. But storytelling has taught me so much about listening to story. No matter where I am, if you're talking to me, or you're talking to me, or you're talking to me, or you're talking to me, I begin to hear what you have to say as a story. And I listen very carefully to not only what you say, but what's behind what you say. And you carry people with you. I do some work helping senior citizens write down their stories. And I encourage them, I mean, certainly we work about writing their memories and their memoirs, but I encourage them over and over, and we have begun to do it more, to tell their stories. I said, because if you share them that way, nobody has to run to get the piece of paper or find the audio tape or find your CD. You will live inside them because they carry your story around. And I do. I can't tell you, over the course of 20 years of telling stories, how many people have told me stories, and how I just have this whole nation that I carry around because of the stories I've remembered. You know, all kinds of stories. That story that I just told, but the stories about your grandmother, and the stories about.
Well, you have Stevie, and you have Carmela, and.
But I have so many stories. I know we have to go. And
we have 45 seconds.
A woman told me in the class that I was teaching about her mother, who grew up very poor. When it was her mother's turn to pass on clothes, she made sure that each and every piece of clothing was well mended, cleaned, pressed, and wrapped in tissue paper, because no one should ever feel beholden. They should always receive things as a gift.
Well, you have been a gift to all of our viewers, and to Kate and I, for sure.
I thank both of you.
It's been a pleasure. It really has been fun, hasn't it?
Thank you so much for joining us on Story by Story, sharing the human experience. We hope you come back again.
Good cheer.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round